Hello, welcome to another teacher support video from FoodPrints. The goal of this video series is to provide you, our amazing teachers, with important information that will help you teach various FoodPrints lessons. The big idea you'll be communicating to your students in this lesson is that soil is made of many different ingredients. Too often these days, children are not permitted to play in the soil or allowed to get dirty. But through this lesson, we can provide safe opportunities for children to have these experiences. That's why this lesson is called Exploring Soil. It's a way to give students a basic appreciation for the soil that's all around them. This Exploring Soil lesson has two components. First, there is a soil dissection, in which students take apart soil to find out what it's made of. There's also a soil separation experiment, where students will look at the layers of different types of soil. These are hands-on, engaging investigations for students, and they're a great way for them to practice using their senses and their observational skills. One important thing to keep in mind with this lesson, if you yourself are uncomfortable with soil or the creatures that might be living in it, that's okay, but do your best to avoid sharing your fear or discomfort with the students, as that could discourage them from engaging in the activities in the lesson. The first thing we want to do with this lesson is get our terms correct. There's often confusion about the words soil and dirt. Soil is not the same as dirt. And here are some easy ways to help understand and explain that difference. The word dirt is used for something we want to get rid of, wash off our clothing, sweep up off the floor. Soil is something we want, need, and have to protect. Soil plays a critical role in growing the food we eat and helping trees produce the oxygen we breathe. Soil is also a home for important insects and other creatures called decomposers. Decomposers are nature's recyclers. They break down decaying organic matter. It's important to help students understand that decomposers play a critical role in helping our soil stay healthy and keeping our ecosystem functioning. The soil separation experiment will help show students the different components of soil. Those components are sand, silt, clay, and organic materials, such as plants and insects, both dead and alive. All right, so the supplies needed for this experiment are a large wide-mouthed jar with a lid, a stirring stick or a spoon, some water, and some soil. You'll also want the soil separation experiment attachment as well as the soil separation sample diagram, both of which can be found online. This experiment can be done with just one large jar that all of the students can view. However, if you have extra jars or if you're comfortable asking kids to bring in jars from home and you have enough soil, you can create as many soil separation jars as you like. So, you're going to need some soil to start, like I have here in this bin. You can get your soil from pretty much anywhere, from a garden, from the ground, under some trees, from a field, whatever you have available. The goal is to have a mix of different soil components that will settle out after being mixed with water. So if possible, try to collect a variety of different types of soil. Some that looks rich and loamy, some that looks dry and sandy, and some that looks wet and full of clay, and so on. The more variety you have, the more separation the students will eventually see. Okay, before you begin the experiment, ask your students what they know or think about soil and why soil is important. It's always fascinating to hear their responses. And you can write these comments down so that you have a comparison later and you can see what they learned during the session. To start, put your students into groups. If you've got extra jars, you might want to organize the groups by how many jars you have. Once the groups are established, pass around your container of soil and have the students feel it, smell it, and share what they notice. Then have each student take a few scoops of the soil and put it into a shared group jar or their own personal jar. When the students have a chance to put a spoonful of soil into the jar, it gets them excited about the experiment. Once the jar is about half full, have the students carefully fill the jar with water and secure it with the lid. Then have them shake the jar to move the soil around. The children love this part. Set the jar in a place where it won't be disturbed but is still visible to your students. Although it can take up to a day or two for the clay to settle out of the water, the sand and silt will begin to settle after a short time. Here, I have a jar that has been sitting for over a day, and you can see the layers clearly. Your students will be so excited to return to their jar over the course of the day and week to observe the different layers of the soil. Once the jar is set aside, your students will now take a look at the soil separation illustration. They will review the illustration with you and predict what will happen with their own soil separation jars. Let's take a look. Here on this illustration, you can see the sand is at the bottom. Ask your students why they think the sand is at the bottom and discuss their comments. Then tell them that grains of sand settle at the bottom because they are the largest and heaviest material in the jar. Next is the silt. Why do your students think silt is next? Silt is a medium-sized grain and settles after the sand. Above that is the clay. Ask why the clay is above the silt. Clay is made of tiny grains and takes a long time to settle out of the water. And the last thing they'll look at is what's floating, the organic material, or things that were or are alive. Ask your students why the organic material floats on top. Your students will most likely be curious about the changes taking place in their jars over the coming days. So encourage them to compare what they're seeing in the jars to what they learned from the soil separation worksheet. Part 2 of this lesson, which is even more hands-on, is soil dissection. If necessary, this can be done as one big group project, though it will be much more engaging to let students do this in small groups or individually. For soil dissection, you will need to distribute the following to each student or group: egg cartons or some other type of tray for sorting, popsicle sticks, or tweezers if you have students who are really afraid to touch the soil with their fingers, magnifying glasses if you have them, if not, no problem, paper or a worksheet for written observations, a writing instrument, and soil. Make sure the soil has lots of things in it, like roots, old leaves, insects, sand, clay, etc. Begin the activity by scooping a good amount from your soil container and giving it to each student or small group to examine. If you're using egg cartons, you can place the soil in the flat section of the carton. Next, tell the students to use their hands or their tools and explore the soil, and encourage them to identify the things they see, such as rocks, sticks, or leaves. They can even use the little cubby holes on the other side of the egg carton to place different items that they find. It's quite fun when they try to place a roly-poly or worm on the carton only to find it getting away. And you should have a plan in place to handle those situations. Some options are doing this activity outside so that living creatures can get away safely, or setting up a container where students can put the living creatures they find. If you don't have an egg carton, you can use a piece of paper and draw lines to make 8 sections. This way, students have a space to separate what they find in the soil. If there are living creatures, this is a good opportunity to explain how to hold them in the palm of their hand for careful observation before placing them somewhere safe. Try explaining that pinching the creature with our fingers might be similar to a bird's beak trying to get at it for dinner. That way, there is more empathy and kindness toward the creature. After they're done exploring, students can work on the soil sorting worksheet individually or in their small groups. Or you can do the worksheet together as a class and use tally marks to count the things they found in the soil. Finally, feel free to encourage the students to draw pictures on their worksheets of the things they found. To wrap up, go back to the soil separation experiment and check to see how much the jars have settled. Make sure not to bump it or shake it when you check on it so that it doesn't mix back up again. To finish this lesson, you can recap what the students have learned by revisiting the big idea, that soil is made of many different ingredients. And you can ask your students some guiding questions, such as, what is soil made of? And how can we tell if soil is healthy? And that's it for exploring soil. Thank you so much for joining me today. See you next time.